Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an array of terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into them, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help. And guys, it definitely matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? First encounter comes to us from Minnesota. Back in September of 1997, I had taken my two hounds out for a hike with me, just north of Vermilion Lake, which is due east of my home at the time in Ely. I was a couple of hours into this hike with the dogs rummaging around here and there in the brush, and I had made my way into an open forest. It was comprised of tall trees with very little undergrowth, making it great for visibility as I hiked along. Ralph was the first to bolt, and Sweetie followed. They were tearing it up into the trees when the two of them began to bark frantically. I started to jog to catch up, and as I finally had them in view, the two of them were darting around what was a large mound of black fur crouched on the ground. At the moment, there was no shape or form to what I was seeing, and the only thing that I could think of was Black Bear, either dead or lying in the woods. Still in a jog and edging closer to the dog, suddenly this black mass launched from the ground, chasing after Ralph on four legs. I knew then that I had been looking at this beast from the rear. It had been lying on the ground, either sleeping or eating something, just like the dogs would do on the rug. Now Sweetie is 100 pounds, and Ralph, being larger, 115. When this thing launched to fend them off, its size in comparison to the dogs dwarfed them. They appeared like two puppies playing with their mom. It was a gigantic black wolf, such as I had never laid my eyes on. And based on its size versus my dogs, I would say it weighed at least 400 pounds, maybe even more. I had seen many wolves in the state before. They always travel in packs, but this thing was alone in jet black. Its size was not that of a timber wolf, and neither was its build. It had an absolutely massive body, and its head was covered in long black fur. The dogs were running in on it, and then scampering away each time it would turn on them, all the while barking relentlessly. It kept turning back to where it had been lying, obviously to protect some type of food from my dogs. I saw it numerous times from the side view, and its body was about 6 feet long without the tail, with its back standing close to 4 feet from the ground. I don't know if it was capable of running any faster, or if it just didn't think the dogs were worth the effort, but it more or less seemed to just trot after them rather than bolt towards them to bite them, acting more like they were chasing a fly from the dinner plate. This scenario played out for about a minute before I called the dogs off and I left. Having made my way back home over the next several weeks, I had described what happened to a number of old-timers and seasoned hunters. More than a few of them said it sounded like I encountered a dire wolf, a species that is said not to exist anymore. I did a little research and saw that it is said to have existed alongside with the saber-toothed tiger in North America, and had become extinct. Well, I'm here to tell you that what I saw was certainly not extinct, and was not traveling in a pack. This was an enormous, vicious animal, and it is living in Minnesota. A second encounter. I believe it was June 13th, 2016. I was making my way through the forest doing a little small game hunting. I was toting my 12 gauge by my side and hoping to run across some squirrel. I must tell you, as I begin this, that I spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours in these woods. If I'm not hiking, then I'm just out for my stroll. I'm very familiar with everything and anything that makes these woods its home, which is to say until this day. I was taking the high line, walking the edge of a heavily wooded ravine about 50 feet below the crest. The ravine itself descended some 200 feet or so below me. It was so heavily covered in trees and low brush that from my position it seemed virtually impassable for man or beast to navigate through it. I was following a game trail that I knew would bring me out on the other side, having been through here before. I didn't know then, but I do know now, why I suddenly had the most unnerving feeling, like I was being watched. We've all had this feeling, but this was different. I felt in such a way that danger was approaching me. That's the only way that I can describe it to you. As I began to look around, trying to shake the feeling that had come over me, I suddenly noticed a patch of bright white below me in the undergrowth. It was as white as a bleached undershirt. Typically, when I'm in the woods, white color is usually acquainted to a deer's tail or the breast of a hawk or owl, but this was much brighter, and too large to be any of them. As I'm staring at this white color in the brush, which is easily 200 feet or more away from me down within the side of the ravine, I start to realize that there's a figure holding the white object, its coloration somewhat blending into the surrounding brush. Keep in mind, at this point, what I am seeing is maybe an inch tall at the distance I was looking at it with the naked eye. I set down my shotgun momentarily and pulled out my binoculars to zero in on what was before me. I now had in focus a tall wolf-like creature that was holding, in its clutches, a pure white cat. The creature was standing in the brush up to its waist, being surrounded on both sides and its back with scrubby trees. It was staring directly at me, as I was it. I could see it clearly. Its head was that of a wolf or an Alaskan husky dog. The snout was long and tapered, and I could actually see its fangs protruding from its jowls. It had a triangular-shaped ears that were pointing straight up, and long but muscular arms were hanging from its sides. This wolf creature was standing perfectly still on its back legs, just like a human, and was clutching a white, apparently feral cat in its hands. I could make out what were long, finger-like appendages, which were tipped with black hawk-like talons, with the cat's fur being bloodied in several spots. This creature was staring directly at me, and I almost couldn't stand looking at it through the lens. It was almost upsetting me in some dark and foreboding kind of way. The upper torso, which I could plainly see was lean and muscular, being covered with sparse amount of hair or fur, through which I could see its skin, while the head was completely covered in fur, like that of a wolf or any other type of canine. Based on the surrounding brush height throughout the ravine, I estimated its height at being somewhere between 7 to 8 feet, and this thing didn't so much as blink for 10 minutes or more. Suddenly, the cat wiggled violently, as if with one final gasp, it was trying to free itself from the monster's claws. I watched as the beast tightened its grasp, and the struggle was over. I took my shotgun in hand and backtracked out of the woods, the entire time feeling as though I'm being followed by this creature. Having seen this wolf man, I had never returned into this area of the woods again. My feeling now is that this creature could have torn me limb from limb, had it been given a chance to do so. The feeling that I had while staring at each other was that of pure, unadulterated evil. This thing was a demon from the pit of hell. Third encounter. It was deer season, I believe 1978 or 79, when my brother and I had ventured into a region north of Caribou, Maine, near Eagle and Square Lake. This was an area in which we had hunted many times before and had scored fairly well throughout the years. Getting fairly near to the location with the truck, we still had a reasonably long hike into the area where we'd begin our stalk. It was several hours later when we had scored our first buck of the season, and having butchered and bagged it, we were making our way out of the forest. At some point, being overcome by the burden of carrying such a heavy load, I stopped to put the pack down and place my hand against a tree in a leaning posture. As soon as my hand hit the tree, I drew it back quickly, having felt something sticky and moist. As I pulled my hand away to look at it, with my palm now facing me, I knew immediately from years of hunting that my hand was smeared with viscous and probably some old animal blood. My brother said to me, "Oh my God, what is that?" I said to him, "It's on the tree," and at the same time we both looked up. Draped over the limb, about 20 feet off the ground, was the complete body of a doe. And it was not old at all. We could see that it was fully intact, with the exception of being that both its front legs were snapped off, and there were two stubs, which we could plainly see from our position. With that, my brother gets the harebrained idea, which he is going to climb up and pull it down, which he proceeded to do. He now, having blood from the tree all over his clothes and hands, he gave the doe a shove, and she came tumbling down to the ground with a whack. Standing over it, she didn't appear to be a day old, and more than likely had been placed there on this very day that we found her. Based on the lack of resistance as we grabbed the head, it appeared as though the neck had been broken as well, but by what? In all of our days hunting, we had neither seen nor heard of such a thing being found in Maine. We began to examine the tree trunk, looking for any indication of something having climbed the tree, and there was nothing to be seen. No black bear would have left a carcass untouched, and I had never heard of a black bear treeing its catch, with both of its legs being broken cleanly and its neck also being broken. The rest of the hide was completely untouched, no claw marks and or stains. The carcass was in perfect condition. When we made it back to Prescott Island, we had stirred up no small commotion with our talk about our find. Having left the doe in the woods, it was then that one of our cronies had said, "Why didn't you bring it out so we could see it?" To which we said that we were already carrying 125 pounds of meat. They became so incensed about that we all decided we'd have to go back and get the doe. The following day, having driven back up there and hiking back to where the doe had been, it was gone. With the discovery of the deer being gone, this kid Joey starts blowing off on how we planned all this to freak everyone out. And I said, "Hey, wait a minute. You asked us to come back here. I didn't even want to go, nor did I ask you." With that, he and the others started to look around when this guy Frank said, "Check this out." He's pointing to and staring at what was a large singular footprint in the soft peat. Then one of the boys said it was a footprint of the hairy man. Well, as you would imagine, that about iced the proverbial cake for all of us, and, being unarmed, we exited hastily, to say the least. Myself and the others are now believers in something that we had all heard about in passing through the years and never seen. With this newfound evidence of the first deer, and now the footprint, we're convinced that there is something large and well able to kill wandering around up here. And it changed our lives and thoughts on a permanent basis. And today's fourth encounter. I was a 24-year veteran of the force when this happened, and I was on highway patrol that night. Most of the old-timers preferred the night shift because it's typically quieter than the day shift, and on this particular night, the weather was crisp and clear. Now, there were a couple of stop signs that I would generally set up on early in the shift, and then later in the night, I would hit the main highway with the radar gun. I had a spot that I would back into, which was on a grassy edge of the highway. The forest was at my back, and a rock wall dominated the left side. By the time the speeder made it around the granite outcropping and saw my squad car, the gun had already bagged their speed. I had already tagged a couple of speeders that night and was preparing for the next. I turned the car off momentarily and stepped into the trees to take care of some business. It was a pitch black and moonless evening. Trust me when I tell you there was no one around in this stretch of highway, just woods and rocky walls. I was finishing up and turning toward the car when I saw headlamps shining around the bend coming toward my position. Remember, nobody could see me here until they had virtually passed in front of me. Just as I had seen the glare of the oncoming lights, the car's horn started sounding, and they were leaning on it heavily. They flew by and kept going, and I had taken maybe 3 steps toward my car when this large, dark mass came into view from around the wall on my left. Whatever it was came walking along the shoulder of the highway, and it was huge. I immediately knew this was what the car was honking at. As I was reaching for my flashlight out of my belt loop, I said, "Hey you, stop right there. Stop where you are," and hit it with the light. When I did so, it turned toward me, growled, and its eyes were glowing red before the flashlight had even hit them. When the flashlight's beam met its face, it let out the loudest, most intense roar that you could even imagine. Its head held high into the air and screamed like King Kong. The mouth was wide open, and I could see its teeth. I grabbed my revolver, preparing to fire, but I didn't have time to shoot before it had fled. It took maybe 4 fast steps, or leaps, for it clear all 4 lanes of that highway and both shoulders disappearing into the night. I jumped into my squad car and started it up, flipping on the headlights, and I saw nothing. So I turned on the spotlight and moved across to the far shoulder. When I did, I caught it briefly looking in my direction with its bright red eyes beaming in the darkness. The damn things were like red reflectors on a kid's bike, and it turned and hightailed it out of sight and back into the woods. In total, there were 4 units on patrol that night, with the dispatcher and sergeant being back at the station. When I got on the radio, I started to tell everyone what I had seen, which I didn't think would be taken as a joke. That's exactly what happened. The chatter coming over the speaker was ridiculous, and the dispatcher told me to fill out a report. This creature had to have been 7 to 8 feet tall, and when the light hit it, I could see its dark flesh through its dark fur, along with its hair that served as a beard. Its teeth were large, triangular like shark teeth, and its fur was quite long and matted. Its head and shoulders were almost like one mass, kind of like a turret on a tank. It was the most frightening thing that you could imagine, and then some. I don't know why I didn't pull that trigger, but when you fire around as a police officer, it's a big deal. And firing around at a walking bipedal dog, well, you can just imagine how well that would have went over. As the thing turned across the street, I saw it was 5 feet across at the shoulders maybe, and its fur on its butt was totally encrusted with leaves and crap. While it was near me, the stench which was emanating from it was sickening. The next day, I went back to that spot with my truck I parked on the shoulder and then walked back to where it had come from. I could clearly see heavy impressions in the soft grass of the shoulder, and when I crossed over to the side where it had run out of view, I could see even deeper impressions. These prints were large, and it appeared to be heavier on its heels. You can't believe the crap I had to put up with after that night, and I retired shortly thereafter, doing 25 years of service. And today's final encounter. Dispatch had sounded a call asking all available units to report to the scene of a domestic dispute. A woman was calling for help, saying that her husband was going to kill her with a sword. Now, any type of law enforcement officer will tell you that these are the worst types of calls to go on. Nationwide, many officers have been shot trying to defuse such a situation. As soon as the call came over the radio, I was on my way with 2 other units. As I arrived at the location, which was a house trailer located deep into a wooded lot, Car 05 was ahead of me. We got out of the cars and went to the door, guns drawn. We could hear that there was a heated dispute still going on inside the home, including a lot of cursing and yelling coming from a man and a woman. My partner pounded on the door, shouting "Police," while I watched, standing off to one end of the trailer home. Just after he knocked, a female voice shouted, "Good, they're here. Now you're going to go to jail, you low-life creep." Seconds after this, I heard a crash from the backside of the home, which was followed by the sighting of a man running out into the field wearing nothing but a pair of shorts and sneakers. Having forced his way out, jumping through a window, I shouted to my partner that we had a runner and started in pursuit of this man just as the 3rd unit was arriving. Upon seeing me give chase to the man, the 3rd officer started driving out into the field with his Bronco in pursuit of the same. It had been about 4 p.m. in the afternoon when the pursuit started. As I heard over the radio that the man was unarmed, I had stumbled and fell, and at virtually the same time the Bronco had reached a deep furrow that the truck could not cross. Now the officer and myself were both on foot, chasing after this lowlife. The runner had already reached the woods, and additional backup was on its way as the 2 of us joined forces entering that forest together. We spaced ourselves about 40 yards apart and started walking in. Now, a running man is going into the desolate forest wearing only a pair of shorts is not going to last very long. I must have been several hundred yards into the forest when I came across a creek. I radioed to my partner about the find. There was a slight embankment comprised of some moist brown soil that appeared drier as you moved away from the water. After I told my partner about the creek, he moved forward, coming across it himself. This officer was now going to move easterly, looking for the tracks of the man might have left while crossing the creek, and I was going to follow behind him. Both of us believed that he had gone more in my partner's direction, as I was closing the gap between where I had started and where my partner had begun. I came across some gigantic impressions in the creek's edge. The impressions were so fresh that they were starting to fill with water from the wet soil. One of them looked to be 2 or even 3 feet deep, and the prints had to have been 2 feet long and very wide. I radioed my partner immediately, telling him that to backtrack to my position. We stood there examining the tracks, and we could see one more print on the other side of the creek as well, indicating that something had crossed the creek. Now, just so you can visualize this, the creek's about a foot deep at its deepest point, and maybe 12 feet wide total, including several feet of the bank on each side. There is no way that these tracks were those of the man we were chasing after. We both walked through the water into the woods, following the tracks. Maybe 40 feet into the woods on the other side, we found a sneaker, and at this point there was no reason for the 2 of us to go any further while alone. We retreated back to the field and the trailer. Our reinforcements had already arrived, and I presented the sneaker to the wife, who confirmed that it was her husband's. With the assistance of another agency, our office began a manhunt. We staked out various roads and areas where the man would eventually have to emerge, knowing that he couldn't last long in the woods with no clothing and one sneaker. After several days, the man had not been seen or taken into custody, and the wife said that she hadn't seen him near the property. Neither she nor any of the relatives had heard from him. During this time, the giant impressions by the creek had been the topic of much discussion, as well as the sneaker we found. Some felt that the prints had been enlarged by the softness of the creek's edge, even after I had insisted that they were not, since I had seen them within moments of when they were being made. After the passage of about 2 years, this turned into a missing person, the man still not being seen. About 3 years later, some hunters came across a human skeleton, remains about 5 miles north of where the chase had begun. They had been hunting in some thick timber and found the bones in a patch of tangled briars. After the report, the remains were retrieved by our forensic team. After much examination, we believe that the bones belonged to our missing man. DNA was retrieved from the remaining spouse's child, and it turned up as a match. The skeleton was the runaway man from some 3 years earlier. But here's the real clincher of this experience, and why I want to share this in the first place. According to the coroner, the man's skull had been caved in past the mid-sagittella line. In other words, the head had been smashed in more than halfway by a blunt force trauma. Now, just to give you an idea of this type of force, if I was to take a full swing at your head with a large baseball bat, I couldn't even come close to that type of impact. Not even with 2 or even 3 repeated forceful blows, which could create such damage. Also, numerous ribs had been broken via compound fractures. They were all clean fractures where the bones had been broken into 2 separate pieces. All this must have occurred while the man was in the forest running and alone. Guys, I'm dead tired working on the Conjuring paranormal evidence videos. Hopefully I can have it done by tomorrow night or tonight, maybe tomorrow day. I've got a lot of footage, I've got a lot of pictures, and I've got a lot of stuff going on with it. So hopefully it gets done, because it's really taking a lot of time and it's kicking my butt. I'm very tired. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for all your support, and I truly appreciate it. So with that, my friends, may the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that, well, we call life.